Right now, American soldiers are standing guard in roughly 80 countries that they will never call home. So they are not invading, they are not passing through, they are living there. They are on bases that quietly surrounded the two nations Washington fears most. Now, this matters to you because every one of those bases is paid for by the American taxpayers, and every one of them can pull a nation into a war that it never voted for. By the end of this, you will understand three things: how a country that's war of foreign wars ended up garrisoning the planet, why the bases never came home, and the quiet reason Washington will never give them up. Let's start from the beginning. So, for most of its history, America wanted nothing to do with the problems of the world. Like George Washington himself warned against forming the permanent alliances. During the 1930s, European countries prepared for a major war. At the same time, United States chose to keep its small army and focus on its own home problems. So, Americans believed that the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans acted like giant walls around them. They thought no enemy could ever reach or attack America because these huge two seas separated them from the rest of the world. Then came the morning of December 7, 1941. In under 2 hours, Japanese aircraft destroyed much of the Pacific fleet at Pearl Harbor, so the wall of ocean had failed. For the first time, Americans understood that distance no longer protected them. So what followed was the largest military expansion in human history, and to fight a war on two oceans, US had to build airstrips, ports, and supply depots everywhere, and its forces went Iceland, North Africa, the islands of the Pacific. By 1945, American troops occupied a chain of outposts stretching halfway around the globe. The wars ended, but the bases did not. As the celebrations faded, a new and far colder fear was already rising in the east, when that would turn those temporary posts into something permanent. And by 1947, the alliance that beat Hitler had shattered, the Soviet Union held half of Europe, and Washington became convinced that communism would keep spreading unless something physically stood in its way. The strategy had named containment. The idea was simple and ruthless, means you do not wait for the enemy to reach your shores, you meet him at his fence. So the United States kept its troops in, defeated Germany and Japan, then they signed deal after deal to plan new bases along the edges of Soviet world. Now look at it where they are. West Germany staring across Iron Curtain, Turkey sharing a border itself with USSR, South Korea after a brutal war ended in stalemate in 1953, Japan anchoring the entire Pacific, so each base was a tripwire. If the Soviets attacked, they would kill Americans first, and that planners believed and guaranteed America would fight. But here's what made it stick. The host nations, they often warned the Americans there because a small country living in shadow of Moscow could not defend itself alone. So an American base meant protection without crushing cost of a large army of their own. So these countries, they offered lands, ports, and airfield, and Washington just said yes again and again. By the 1960s, the map had been filled. Hundreds of installations ringing the communist world, Norway all the way to Philippines, and America was no longer a nation with an army abroad. It was a hub of a global defensive web. Now, if this is finally making chaos make sense, take a second to subscribe because it generally helps us keep making these videos. Now, back to the story. Now, the Cold War ended in 1991. The enemy that justified every one of those bases simply collapsed, and yet the bases stayed, almost all of them. But the question is, why? Here is what most people miss. The bases were never only about defense, they were about something quieter, something far more powerful: the control. Think about that. When the Soviet Union fell, America did not pull back. It simply expanded. Like new bases appeared in the Gulf, in the Balkans, in the Central Asia, because a defensive network does not grow after its enemy dies, but a system built to manage the world, it does grow. Consider the Persian Gulf. America imports far less oil from the region than most people assume. So why an enormous base in Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain? Because whoever guards the world's oil arteries holds leverage over every economy that depends on them. So the bases were never about America's fuel tank, it was about everyone else's. And we know after 1971, the world traded oil in dollars. That meant that every nation needed dollars, which means they parked their savings in American banks and American bonds. The US military presence across the Gulf was the silent guarantee behind all that system. Means protect the oil, protect the dollar, protect the throne. And the alliances, they cut both ways. We know like a base in Germany, it defends Germany, but it also keeps Germany inside America's orbit, buying American weapons and following America's lead. Japan and South Korea, they host tens of thousands of troops and they pay billions for the privilege. So the protection is real, so does the dependence. Somewhere between 1945 and the present, we have seen the bases start being a shield and became a throne for the US. So once you see a network like that, a brutal question follows. A throne is not free. Someone has to pay to sit on it. So who is paying and how long they can afford it? Here's the thing. Those 80 countries on the map, they are telling you America built the most powerful empire in history without ever calling it one. That is why exactly they cannot easily walk away. As every base is a promise. Look at this. Pull troops out of South Korea and Seoul may build a nuclear weapon. Leave the Gulf and the rivals rush into vacuum. Abandon Europe and the alliance that anchors the dollar starts to crack. So the network that gives America its power, it is also the chain that keeps it committed everywhere and forever. Analysts estimate the US spends hundreds of billions of dollars a year sustaining this global presence, and it strains the budget and exhausts the troops. And now it is being tested by a rival Cold War planners never imagined, China, as China is building its own navy, its own bases, and it is emerging as a power. So let's close the loops. America got drawn in by a war that proved the oceans no longer protected it. The bases stayed because they started being a shield and became a system. These were guarding oil, the dollar, and the alliances that hold the world together. And Washington will not give them up because the same network that makes America strong is the one thing that it cannot put down without losing its hegemony. So the bigger lesson is this. Power once spread across the globe, it becomes almost impossible to bring it home. Next, we ask the obvious question. Can China actually replace this system? Subscribe for more.